Hello there.
Hello there and welcome to today's lore video, which is about the first of the 7 lightsaber combat forms, Form 1, otherwise known as Shii-Cho. Now this combat form was developed during the transitional period within the Jedi Order from ancient metal swords to more contemporary lightsabers. Shii-Cho was originally intended to cater to these new weapons, establishing the basic motions and target zones utilized with the lightsaber. As Shii-Cho was effectively an experimental combat form, and was created prior to the emergence of Dark Jedi and Sith Lords, it did not address the issue of lightsaber to lightsaber combat, and was therefore quickly replaced by Form 2 afterwards. Now despite this, Shii-Cho continued to find a niche as a training form, with almost every Jedi duelist receiving some instruction in it, and including elements in their own combat styles. Shii-Cho was considered an effective fallback option when no other form or combat style would do. Now the lightsaber combat of Form 1 was wild and raw, relying on deliberate tactics and being primarily aimed towards disarming rather than injuring foes. Basic initiates in the style demonstrated rather clumsy performance, though in the hands of a master, Shii-Cho was fluid but highly randomized and unpredictable. As the most ancient style lightsaber combat, Shii-Cho, as mentioned earlier, was developed during the transition period from swords to lightsabers, so were wielded in a manner similar to swords, and many of the maneuvers, such as attacks or parries, remained unchanged, as the key principles of the old sword fighting methods continued to be incorporated. Now although Shii-Cho was not created with lightsaber to lightsaber combat in mind, it was still the preferred form when it began appearing, since it was pretty much the only option. As lightsaber duels between practitioners of the Force became increasingly common, Form 1 was judged as being inadequate for the task, leading to the development of the second form of lightsaber combat, also known as Makashi. However, despite the development of a combat form tailored to lightsaber dueling, Shii-Cho was not rendered obsolete. In simplicity and basic focuses left the form ideally suited for basic training, and it was used to provide initiates with an early introduction to lightsaber combat. Now Shii-Cho continued to remain an effective form of combat for thousands of years. However, as basic as it is, a true master of the form could use it in both lightsaber combat and battlefield situations to devastating effect, as demonstrated many a time by one of, if not the foremost master of Form 1, Kit Fisto. Now when used, Shii-Cho itself fostered an emotionally heated mindset which resulted in the considerable temptation to execute combat with lethal intent, requiring great restraint to exercise the form without going too far. Now despite this pull to kill, the style was designed for the purpose of disarming without seriously injuring. Now although simplistic and raw in the hands of a master, the blade work was described as like watching water flow over the falls. In combat, Form 1 encouraged deliberate tactics, calling for continuous step-by-step advancement while cutting off the opponent's angles. Now Form 1 was mainly specialized towards engaging multiple opponents, the wide, sweeping motions being ideally suited towards attacking numerous adversaries. However, it was not as useful against single opponents, as such enemies had complete mobility and could find a weakness in Shii-Cho's comparatively clumsy blade work. Now when it came to training and practice, students had to be taught to draw upon the Force rather than rely on their senses. Early level Shii-Cho blast deflect training was conducted with a blindfold, forcing the initiate to rely upon his instincts, just like how Obi-Wan taught Luke aboard the Falcon in A New Hope. Now later, training was conducted through the use of sequences and velocities, with the continuous repetition making the moves instinctive reflexes. Now these training routines were then carried over to all following lightsaber combat forms which use similar methods. And when it comes to the known moves and maneuvers of Form 1, they are actually split between two methods of combat which determine how these moves are executed. You have the ideal form and the live combat form. Ideal form was mainly used in sparring, and all the moves and maneuvers were executed at perfect horizontal vertical angles, with attacks and parries being perpendicular to one another. Whereas the live combat form was much more functional, the attacks being diagonal strikes at each of the 6 respective body zones, the goal being to increase speed and reduce actual movement. Now these body target zones, as mentioned, are pretty much just the body divided into 6 target areas or zones, Zone 1 was the head, 2 the right arm and side, 3 left arm and side, 4 back, 5 right leg and 6 left leg. And one of the main attacks utilised by Form 1 practitioners was referred to as the Disarming Slash, consisting of a strike directed at the opponent's weapon in an attempt to rip it out of their grasp. Another technique was dubbed the Sarlacc Sweep, a wide sweeping attack in which the duelist struck against multiple enemies, and other maneuvers included the basic Form 1 Horizontal Slash. Now, as mentioned before, one of the most well-known Form 1 specialists was Kit Fisto, who was credited as one of the best duelists in the Jedi Order. His mastery of the form was advanced, and he applied it in many battles and duels, always with his trademark smile. One of his most notable opponents was General Grievous, whom Fisto proved able to hold his own against and nearly defeat. Seen as Form 1 specialization against multiple foes, was well suited to holding off the 4 lightsabers Grievous wielded. Fisto's quick thinking and speedy reflexes enabled him to recognize vulnerable body zones on his opponents and react immediately, as shown when he cut off Grievous's legs and later one of his hands during their duels. His versatility with Shii-Cho was such that he could ably apply it towards the usage of dual blades or even light whips. However, Kit Fisto was not without his weaknesses. Form 1 was ideal when heavily outnumbered and effective against many opponents, but not so much against a single opponent, which is what proved to be Kit Fisto's downfall. In his final battle against Darth Sidious, despite Fisto's own power and skill, he simply just wasn't able to compete with Sidious. But he was able to at least last longer than his fellow combatants Agen Kolar and Sesei Tin, being able to block at least a few blows before being struck down himself. And that is Shii-Cho, the first of the 7 lightsaber combat forms. So, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll talk to you on the next one, and until then, may the Force be with you.